Warning. This Jack the Ripper tour contains graphic content, sexual themes, and some things that viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Then let's go! Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Jack the Ripper tour powered by Rippervision. My name is Johnny, and I'm going to be your guide for this evening. So, good evening!
Evening.
Good evening. And I'll be taking you through the dark, dank, and desolate streets of London's East End. Now, the thing is, guys, if you come to the East End as it is today, obviously so much has changed around the area, and so many of the old buildings have been demolished and turned into new developments. But you have to expect that with London, because London always is going to change. You can always expect some new developments going to be around the area, especially in the East End. I mean, you still do have an awful lot of the old Victorian and Georgian essence around the essence, but you're always going to see some new developments, and you have to expect that. Thing is, the East End has changed quite a lot, and the old London of Jack the Ripper is very much long gone, but there is still that essence still there. Thing is, if you came back to this area some 132 years ago, you would have found yourself in the poorest district in all of London, because Whitechapel back in 1888 had a population of some 76,000 people. And most of these people lived under the breadline, struggling day to day to keep a roof over their heads or food in their stomachs. Now, there were honest types that go and get an honest job, but usually honest jobs didn't pay very well. So people resorted to a life of crime just to get by. If they were men, they then become pimps or bully boys, as it was known at the time. If they were children, they'd take a page out of Oliver Twist's book and pick a pocket or two. But if they were women, there was only one avenue open for them, and that was a life of prostitution. And there were some 1,200 prostitutes living in this area back in 1888, ranging from the ages of 12 to 60. And these girls didn't charge much for their sorry wares. They'd only ever charged as little as 4 old pence for any kind of sexual misadventure, and there is 4 old pence. If you want to... I'm not offering it to you, by the way. You know, I am a married man. Thing is, these girls had only ever charged a small amount of money because that was the flat rate to get into one of 233 common lodging houses, or doss houses, as they were known. Now, the buildings right through the gates right there were one of 233, and these places were rather sorry affairs. Because for 4 pence, you didn't get much in the way of luxury. You didn't even get a bed to sleep in. You laid on the floor on a mattress of straw and rag that probably had hasn't changed from the night before, so probably reeked of the prey occupant's urine. A lot of the time this attracted vermin, so you kept up all night scratching because of fleas, or woke up with a rat sitting on your chest. Probably a lot better the person sleeping next to you, who was more prone to stealing your belongings than letting you have a good night's sleep. But believe me when I tell you this, guys, that was a hell of a lot better than sleeping on the wet, hard cobbles of London's East End. Now, the thing is, ladies and gentlemen, I have been studying this area and these murders for a very long time, for some 27 years of my life, ever since I was a little boy. I've been doing these tours around here for 16 years. Obviously, I was a little bit taller by that point. I still have my own friends say to me, "Hey, Johnny, what these girls actually look like? I mean, what are they like in the films? Were they all curly haired and big buxom? Were they all rosy cheeked? They'll speak a bit like this." I mean, most people still assume that these girls all looked a bit like that. And I don't know about you, but if that cost 4 pence, I wouldn't say no. Thing is, if you went back in a time machine back to 1888 and expect to find a woman this good looking for 4 pence, you'd be very sadly mistaken, because what you would actually find was a woman who looked a little bit more like that. Because these were hard living women, hard drinking women as well. Because gin was like the crack cocaine of its day. You could buy a jar of gin back in 1888 for as little as a penny. And this isn't the sort of gin you can get in a pub in this day and age. This is the sort of gin that was brewed in people's bathtubs, in their backyards. Proper methylated spirits that would rot the metal out of the bathtubs they were brewed in. So think about what it would have done to these women's eyesight, their teeth, or to their liver. A lot of the time these girls would rather spend a penny on this rot gut gin than actually go to their bathhouse. So the only time they wash their bodies were in the same puddles that a horse would urinate in. But it's these very same women that I'm going to tell you guys about tonight. In fact, the first of these women I'm going to tell you about tonight was last seen live on this very street on the 7th of August 1888, trying to find herself 4 pence for a bed, and her name was Martha Tabrum. Now, around about midnight, the 7th of August 1888, Martha Tabrum was seen standing just over there where the lights are on, right there, outside of a place called George Yard Buildings. Now, George Yard Buildings were demolished in the 1970s. What stands in its place is this new development right here. But that is where, on the 7th of August 1888, 39-year-old Martha Tabrum was seen in the company of a man who looked like a soldier. But because Martha was known to service the servicemen, if you know what I mean by that, no one thought too much of it. She's gone to the dark stairwells with this guy, and that's the last time she's ever seen live. Because at near 5 o'clock in the morning on the 7th of August 1888, at 4:45, a man by the name of John Saunders Reeves is going down the stairwells on his way to work. As he comes up the first floor landing, which would be just above where the lights are, he's come across a very horrible discovery, that of the body of a woman. And she's absolutely covered in blood. Now, he doesn't know what to do, so he runs out into the street to try and get some help. It was at least 15 minutes until the police turned up at the scene. And when the police turned up at the scene, do you think they did any kind of crime scene investigation? They dust for prints, they cordoned off the area. Do you think they did anything like that, ladies and gentlemen? No. All the police did was declare the body dead, take it to the mortuary and scrub the blood away. But when the body was taken to the mortuary and later identified as 39-year-old Martha Tabrum, they discovered she'd been strangled, had her throat cut, and then been stabbed 39 times. In her throat, her chest, her abdomen, and also in her sexual organs. One such wound lit to her chest right there, I thought had been done by a bayonet, a soldier's weapon. Now, you could immediately assume it was the soldier who committed this attack. But the thing is, let's not forget that this is a very violent area. But you have to also point out that soldiers aren't allowed to take their weapons out and leave. And also, she's a very vulnerable woman in a very violent area. The police understood all of this, But as it was such a violent area, they didn't follow on the case, so they ended the investigation with a verdict of willful murder by person or persons unknown. The thing is, if the police had more at their disposal, then maybe they could have caught the murderer before he'd end up committing more crimes. Because 3 weeks later, the killer would strike again, and this time it's far more brutal than before. So let's go. Right, guys. So, one with the Ripper Vision. Woo! And what I'm showing you here is the first of many comparison images I'll be showing you on tonight's tour, showing you what this area used to look like back in 1888 to how it does today. The thing is, if you found yourself down here on Thrall Street back in the day, you probably want to get out very quickly, because this was the slum district. This is where many of the criminals and prostitutes all used to live and work. But if they weren't out pimping or whoring, they were usually out drinking for pence. And the next time we would see Mary Ann Nichols would be about half a mile away from where we are right now, on a street called Bucks Road. Now, I'm not going to take you guys to Bucks Road today because it doesn't really exist anymore. It's actually now called Durwood Street right now. It's actually where the site of the Crossrail development is going on at the moment. But see how it looked back in 1888? It's a very different picture. Now, at 3:45 in the morning on the 31st of August 1888, a policeman by the name of John Neal is coming down Bucks Road. I'm just going to point out that's not John Neal. Okay? But at 3:45, he comes up to the railway bridge right there and shines his lantern down on what he assumes is a bundle of tarpaulin. But as he comes a little bit closer, he's discovered the body of a woman. And she's had her throat cut from ear to ear and back again, severing both carotid arteries and severing her windpipe. He also had to assume the killer had strangled her beforehand, because there'd been no sound of a scream and no arterial blood spray on the wall next to her head. But, as we've already learned with Martha Tabrum 3 weeks prior, it's not really CSI Whitechapel round here. So all the police did was declare the body dead, take it to the mortuary and scrub the blood away. But when the body was taken to the mortuary and later identified as 43-year-old Mary Ann Nichols, in this mortuary photograph right here, they discovered she'd been ripped open from her groin to her sternum, exposing her intestines from her abdominal cavity. The killer had also stabbed her numerous times in her sexual organs. Now, this did get the attention of the police. But the police didn't know who the hell they were supposed to be looking for. I mean, they heard rumours that it might be the work of a mad butcher who was known to menace the prostitutes of the area, who went by the nickname of Leather Apron. Yeah, that famous Leather Apron we've all heard of. Yeah. So to try and hunt down this nefarious Leather Apron, they decided to enlist the services of the greatest detective that London had to offer. And before you guys say it, that was not Sherlock Holmes. In fact, the best man to hunt down the Whitechapel murderer was a 14-year veteran of the Whitechapel police, and his name was Detective Inspector Frederick George Abberline. Now, Inspector Abberline wasted no time coming down onto Thrall Street to start speaking to Mary Ann Nichols' neighbours. Ask what kind of a person she was. Does she have any enemies? Does she have any debts? He was looking for a motive. We didn't find one because no one had a bad word to say against her, so it looked like the case was going to go stagnant. But Abberline wasn't going to see it go out that way. He was going to make sure this maniac was brought to justice. And I like to think that's why over the years when various films and TV shows have been made about the Whitechapel murders, he's always been portrayed by a brilliant actor. I mean, the first time I ever saw someone play Abberline was from the 1988 television serial when he was played by Michael Caine. If you guys haven't seen it, go and watch it. It's fantastic. It's my personal favourite. But then again, the most famous person that ever played Inspector Abberline was American. Yes. Somebody already just whispered it. And he was portrayed in the 2001 film From Hell as a rather handsome drug-addicted psychic. But then again, he was portrayed by my brother from another mother. I know, it's uncanny, isn't it? Yep, my boy Jonny Depp. Whatever you think of Inspector Abberline, he was hot on the case. So we'll see this one out to the very bitter end. As maybe best that Abberline done so, because a week after the murder of Mary Ann Nichols, the killer struck again, and this time it is far worse than before. Now, in the second guys, I'm going to take you down Brick Lane, which is very famous for its restaurants. Right, guys. So once again, I'm showing you another comparison image of what this area used to look like back in 1888, how it does today. And what used to stand just over to my right-hand side was number 29 Hanbury Street, and that used to house a great deal of different businesses back in the day. They used to sell packing cases, they used to sell cat food, but in the backyard number 29, which is actually now in the corner of the Ace and Tape shop right now, is where many of the ladies at night would go and take their customers, what they would refer to as a 4-penny knee trembler. If anybody wants to find out what that is, just ask me after the tour. I'm not showing you. Right? But at 5:30 in the morning on the 8th of September 1888, a woman by the name of Annie Chapman was seen outside the front door of number 29, so just over there, in the company of a man who I want you guys to get a little bit acquainted with. A man wearing a dark peak cap and a dusty old coat. So someone who looks absolutely nothing like me. This man apparently said to Annie Chapman, "Will ya?" And she said to him, "Yeah." We'll follow him through the front door, which was never locked, and into the backyard of number 29. Now, because the backyard number 29 was such a renowned haunt for the prostitutes, a lot of the locals didn't think too much of it. They heard rather strange noises coming from the backyard. In fact, one neighbour who lived at number 27, a guy called Albert Kadosh, went into his backyard at 5:45 to use his toilet. As he's walking past the fence on the other side, he heard a large slam against it and somebody saying no. Did he bother looking over it? No, he didn't. All he did was go to the end of his yard, go to the toilet and bugger off to work. Even when he's stepping into his back door, you know, he could have easily seen in to the backyard number 29. And that fence was no taller than me. But at 6 o'clock in the morning, a man by the name of John Davis is stepping into the backyard number 29 to use his own toilet. As he steps in and looks down to his left where that arrow's pointing, what he discovers was truly diabolical, because he found the mutilated body of Annie Chapman. Now, I will point out that that picture right there is actually taken from the Johnny Depp movie From Hell. So that's not an actual crime scene photograph, but it gives you a hell of an idea. Now, Annie had been strangled and had her throat cut from ear to ear and back again. Also, the killer had placed her hand over her breast to cover it up, so he was placing the crime scene. He then pulled up her skirt and cut her open from her groin to her sternum, taken out her intestines and splayed them over her right shoulder, with the objective to take away a few of this innocent 47-year-old woman's vital organs away. He's taken away 2 from Annie Chapman. He's taken away part of her bladder and the whole of her uterus, carved out with such precision that the doctor at the time believed whoever had done that to Annie in the backyard number 29 had some kind of medical expertise. That did not necessarily mean a doctor back in 1888, because most people went with a knife around the area who had done that to Annie. Any kind of butcher, veterinarian, or barber surgeon like Sweeney Todd. The thing is, most people who held those professions around the area were usually Eastern European Jews. And there were some 20,000 living in the area at the time. A lot of the local English had a lot of apprehensions against the Jews. They believed that no Englishman could have done that to these 3 English women. They started victimising the Jewish, started beating them up in the streets and smashing their windows in, and calling them leather aprons. So it led to Inspector Abberline doubling up patrols around the area, not only to hunt the murderer down, but also to stop an anti-Jewish riot exploding on the street. So why you had so many police on the beat throughout most of September in 1888 is why throughout most of September the killer didn't strike. But it's not to say that we didn't hear from him. So let's go. I'll take us here to the churchyard of Christ Church, Spitalfields, which, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the most beautiful churches in all of London. It's also right next door to the world famous 10 Bells pub, which between 1977 and 1988 was London's first theme pub, and it was actually themed around the Whitechapel murders and renamed after the man who brought us all here today. And I thought I'd tell you about when we first ever heard this eponymous nickname that brought us all here today. Now, before the 28th of September 1888, everyone used to refer to our killer by the name of the Whitechapel murderer, the East End fiend, or commonly by the nickname of Leather Apron. It was actually to a letter was sent to the newspapers on the 28th of September 1888. And we started to refer to our killer by the name we all know him as today. I know you might not be able to make out the lettering right there, but luckily enough I do know it off by heart. The letter itself was written in red ink and reads as so. Dear Boss, I keep on hearing that the police have caught me, but they will not fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about Leather Apron gave me real fits. I am down on whores and shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and want to start again. You'll soon hear of me and my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with. They went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ears off and send to the police officers. Just for jolly, wouldn't you? Keep this letter back until I do a bit more work and then give it out straight. My knife is so nice and sharp. I want to get to work right away if I get the chance. Good luck. Yours truly,
Jack the Ripper.
Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving the trade name he ends the letter with. And what a trade name he gives us, my friends. The sort of name that cuts through the imagination just like his knife through flesh. I mean, Jack is a very common name in Victorian England. I mean, most people who were called John were nicknamed Jack. But then you get the trade name. The Ripper does exactly what it says on the tin. He cuts, he slices, he rips, and leaves a bloody trail in his mitts. But when that letter was sent to Inspector Abberline, he didn't believe it was from the murderer. He believed that the newspapers had fabricated it so they could stir up animosity in the area. So we actually warned the press not to print it unless the murderer struck again. The thing is, the newspapers wouldn't have to wait long for that. Only 2 days. Because on the 30th of September 1888, the killer would not strike once, but twice in under 1 hour. So let's go. And they're like, oh my god! I was like, alright, what are you doing here? It's like, I'm cleaning up. It's like, do you mind if we help? I was like, yeah, sure, mate.
Yeah.
We're just picking out the weeds and putting down some flowers and everything like that. And it's like, what are you doing now? I'm like, I don't know, I was just going to go and have a pint. And it's like, yeah, we'll buy you a drink for cleaning up our great aunt's like thing. Like her agree. And I was like, okay.
Mind blown or something.
So I went with Elizabeth Strite's great nephews and had a pint with them and chatted about Jack the Ripper. And I was like, I don't usually like talking shop while I'm in the pub. I was like, how the hell did you guys find out about this? And they were basically just saying, oh, we found out that the graveyard had just given her a gravestone and we didn't authorize this. So we went to speak to them and then they said that there was a guy who was down there cleaning it. I think I do a very good impression of them as well, actually. But they were nice lads.
Yeah.
So I went and had a couple of pints with them, and I always go down there and I always look after the graves. I try to do it at least 5 times a year.
Yeah.
But like on their birthdays and anniversaries of their murders, and whenever I can get half a chance. I know it's going to be a hard time when I move down to the south coast.
Oh yeah.
But, right guys, Gather around, gather around. Now I'm just going to point out that our next lady didn't look anything like this. Okay, our next lady did look like Lionel Richie. Our next lady was actually a rather good-looking woman for her 45 years of age. She had long curly brown hair, rather slim physique, and was also the first of our girls who was not a born Londoner. In fact, she wasn't even English. She was born in Sweden in 1843, and her name was Elizabeth Gustafsdotter. Born in 1843, and when she was at least 22 years of age, she moved away from Gothenburg and moved to London. It was there she met a man by the name of John Stride. They fell in love, they got married, and they moved over to the East End of London, and they opened a coffee shop together. And they ran this coffee shop very well for about 15 years, until 1884, when tragically her husband died. And she wasn't left with much, but Elizabeth Stride was an indomitable character. She then moved over to Whitechapel and worked 3 jobs. She was the cleaner, she was the seamstress, and also what I think is really amazing is worked as an interpreter. Because this girl could speak 4 languages. Not only her native English and Swedish, but also German, and also speak Yiddish. So she actually worked as an intermediary between the Jewish and the English businessmen. I mean, I can barely speak English, and she spoke 4 languages. I think she's absolutely flipping amazing. But I don't know what happens to her in September of 1888, because on Sunday the 30th of September 1888, she's seen about a quarter mile away from where we are right now, soliciting on a street called Burner Street. Now, I'm not going to take you guys to Burner Street today because it doesn't really exist anymore. It's actually now called Henriquez Street, and the old buildings were knocked down 100 years ago to make way for a school playground. But just in the middle, right there, was a place called Duckfield's Yard. It's where Elizabeth Stride was seen at 12:30 in the morning on the 30th of September 1888 in the company of a guy who looked rather similar to the person seen with Annie Chapman 3 weeks prior. The guy wearing the dark peak cap and the dusty old coat. But according to the eyewitness, a policeman by the name of Will Smith, obviously not the same Will Smith, this man was smoking a pipe, she was eating a bag of sweets, everything looked fine at the time. But 30 minutes later, another person's about to come down in a Duckfield's Yard, and his name is Louis Dimshits. Why the hell are you laughing? There's nothing funny about the name Louis. I know. But at 1 o'clock in the morning, Louis pulls his horse and cart in a Duckfield's Yard after a hard day's work down in Crystal Palace in South London, which is my hometown. And as he pulls his horse and cart in a Duckfield's Yard, his horse and cart shies away to the left and refuses to move. Now, it's just assumed someone's dumped something in the yard for him. He can't see anything in front of him because it's pitch black, so he kneels down and strikes a match. But as he does so, he's discovered the body of Elizabeth Stride. Now, Elizabeth had been strangled and had her throat cut, just like the other women before her. But that's it. There's no abdominal mutilation, no attack to her sexual organs. So are we to assume that our killers just got lazy all of a sudden? The thing is, guys, I highly doubt that, because serial killers, like the Whitechapel murderer, progressively get worse. And I've said this from the start of the tour, that when a murderer like the Whitechapel murderer, he starts strangling and cuts the throat. Now, that's his modus operandi. But then he gradually gets worse. He starts disemboweling, and then he starts taking organs away. So why would Elizabeth Stride, he just cuts her throat? What I have to assume has happened is that the killer had been disrupted before he could finish the job. There was evidence that he attempted to do so because her skirts were found pulled up past her waist, and there was cuts around her thighs. That before the killer could actually rip her open, he heard the noisy ponying cart coming around the corner, had to stop what he was doing and hide in the darkness of the yard to avoid detection. So maybe, just maybe, when Louis knelt down and struck that match and looked into the eyes of Elizabeth Stride, if only he'd looked up, he'd looked right into the eyes of the Whitechapel murderer, wouldn't he, my dear? And as soon as Louis, as Roger gets some help, it's giving the killer all the time he needed to flee the scene. So where is he going to go from here? It's not he's going to go home and put his feet up because he hasn't committed an atrocity for the night. He hasn't disemboweled this woman. He hasn't taken her what it means for her to be a woman. So he's going to need to find fresh meat. But he's not going to find it in Whitechapel with Abberline on his tail, no. Where he goes to find his next victim would be in the oldest, richest and most powerful part of our capital. And that, guys, is just around the corner. So let's go. Right, guys. So, I know we haven't gone very far. We've actually now ventured to what's technically the oldest part of our capital, where the Romans first settled some 2,000 years ago and referred to it as Londinium. We've now ventured to the square mile, the financial sector. We've now ventured in to the city of London. Now, the thing is, the city of London is just one of the 32 boroughs that build up our capital city. But it's also the smallest borough of our capital city. It's also the least populated as well. There's only about 8,000 people who live here. But it's also worth pointing out that the City of London also has its own leader, or Lord Mayor of London. Now, we have a Lord Mayor of London every year. You know, we've had nearly 700 Lord Mayors of London. They have one every, since 700 years ago. Actually, if you want the accurate number, it's 697 come November this year. But the Lord Mayor of London actually has the power to keep the monarch out of this part of London. I mean, imagine the scene. Say if the Queen was on the tour right now. I mean, say if the Queen was on the tour right now, yeah? And obviously she's lovely, yeah? But the Lord Mayor of London can actually come into the tour and kick the Queen off, and she can, she can actually be turfed off by the Lord Mayor of London, and nobody can contest that, not even her. And that is power you just can't compare. But then again, the Queen's never been on my tour. Well, not yet anyway. Bloody COVID. But it's also worth pointing out that the City of London also has its own police who are completely separate from the Metropolitan Police who look after the rest of London. As the City of London Police were on the 29th of September 1888, 132 years ago today, arrested a woman just on the other side of the road from where we're standing right now for being drunk and disorderly. And her name was Catherine Eddowes. Now, around about 9 o'clock in the evening on the 29th of September 1888, Catherine Eddowes was running up and down outside of a pub just over there, making a complete fool of herself. She was going ding, 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 I am a fire engine. Like what we all do. Until she tripped over her own skirts and knocked herself out, and two city police officers had to take her to the drunk tank opposite Liverpool Street Station. Now, she was kept there until she'd sobered up. The thing is, once she'd sobered up, it was then 1 o'clock in the morning, Sunday the 30th of September 1888. Let's not forget this one, Elizabeth Stripe's body has just been discovered down the road in Whitechapel. But because there were no telephones or radios back in those days, they didn't know there'd been a murder in Whitechapel. So the city police were quite content to release all their drunks and their vagrants, one of which being Catherine Eddowes. So when she's releasing the drunk tank, she goes pretty quietly. She even turns around to the desk sergeant and says to him, "Good night, me old cock," before making her way not back into Whitechapel where she said she'd lived, but deeper into the city, because there was a place in the city she knew she could find herself a few pence, at a place rather appropriately named the Prostitutes Island. That's where I'm going to take you guys to now, so let's go.
Yep. Yes.
Top banana. Right guys, so after leaving the drunk tank, Captain Eddowes makes her way down to a place called the Prostitutes Island. Now the Prostitutes Island was quite a remarkable place here in the city of London. Further ladies of the night would go and buy their trade, and the city police would arrest them for it. Some would say because it was on holy ground, because it was just over there in the churchyard of St. Botolph's without Aldgate. But that wasn't the case in some way, because as that was on a traffic island back in 1888, it was actually also situated in a kind of a dead ground, because it was in between the borderlines of the City of London and the County of Middlesex. So you had two different police forces who worked on either side of the road, but the church could only commit their law to that ground. So it was church law, and the church would allow them to solicitate because it was safer for them to do it there than doing it out on the street. So these girls would actually go there and solicitate. They wouldn't be able to, fornicate there, but they were allowed to solicitate. That's why the girls went into the Prostitutes Island, as it was nicknamed. That's where Catherine Eddowes has gone at 1:30 in the morning. Now, she must have been a good-looking lady for her 46 years of age, because by 1:35, she was seen standing just over there outside the entrance of a place called Mitre Square. And she wasn't alone. In fact, she was seen to come here with a guy who I think we're a bit familiar with by this point. The guy wearing a dark peak cap and a dusty old coat. But according to the eyewitness, a fellow by the name of Joseph Lawender, this guy was about 5'7" in height, so about my height, between the ages of 25 and 35, so about my age. He also had a red neckerchief around his neck. Not looking good for me at the moment, I know. But this guy didn't look like some kind of goth cowboy, so I doubt it was me. But this man and woman then ventured into the darkness of Mitre Square, and I think that's where we should follow. So let's go. Right guys, now obviously Mitre Square has changed a great deal since 1888. I don't think Catherine Eddowes would have come down from what was once Church Passage and expect to find the square world looking so modern. Because back in 1888, all of this was surrounded by warehouses. All over here where the skyscrapers are would have been warehouses. Over there where the playground of the John Cass School is would have been warehouses. There wouldn't have been a garden in the square back in 1888. All this was a commercial area. And as during the daytime, it was busy here in Mitre Square. You would have had umpteen amounts of businesses coming in and out. But not at 1:35 in the morning on a Sunday in September 132 years ago. It would have been pitch black and dead quiet here in Mitre Square. That's why Catherine Eddowes decided to take her customers down Church Passage right there to the darkest corner, just where the gates are this very day and age. The thing is, guys, I could always stand here in Mitre Square and tell you about how dark it used to be and what the buildings used to look like. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you just down into Mitre Passage and show you. So let's go. Right guys, so this is exactly where we are right now. This is this corner of Mitre Square back in 1888. Now, as the square got so dark back in those days, a lot of the business owners were worried about people breaking and stealing goods. So the police had to go around every 15 minutes to make sure that no one was up to any funny business. And on the 30th of September 1888, they fell down to a policeman by the name of Edward Watkins. He'd been around the square a couple of times that night and found nothing out of the ordinary. So he came in at 1:45, 10 minutes after Catherine Eddowes had. He first of all came in from the Mitre Street entrance, just over the other side of the square, and shone his lantern right here. When he shone his lantern in the corner right here, everything was absolutely fine. So then he moved his lantern over the corner where we entered Mitre Square. And when he shines that in the corner right there, everything's absolutely tickety-boo. No signs of any break-ins, no vagrancy, no prostitution. Looks like it's going to be an early night for Edward Watkins. So then he moves his lantern over the corner where we were just standing just a few moments ago. When Edward Watkins shone his lamp in the corner right there, what he discovered would make him sick all over his uniform, because what the killer had left of Catherine Eddowes in that corner of Mike Square was truly diabolical, because in the small amount of time and the small amount of light that the killer had, he'd strangled Catherine to stifle her screams and then cut her throat with such ferocity he'd nearly cut her head clean off. But let's not forget that the killer was in a frenzy. He couldn't finish off Elizabeth Stride earlier on that night, so in his frenzy, he's ripped through 3 layers of Catherine Eddowes' clothing and then ripped her open, no word of a lie, from her rectum to her sternum, taken out her intestines and jammed them into the wound in her neck. He's then taken out her stomach lining and thrown it in her face, with the objective to take away more of one of his victims' vital organs away. On this occasion, he's taken away 3. He's taken away part of her bladder, part of her uterus, and the whole of her left kidney. And even then, guys, even then, the killer's not done! Because you remember that letter that I read to you guys earlier on, the killer saying he was going to clip the lady's ears off. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Well, he didn't clip the ears off of Elizabeth Stride, and he didn't clip the ears off of Catherine Eddowes. What he certainly did do to Catherine Eddowes is damn well near cut her face off, which you can see in this drawing made at the scene of crime. Now, the killer had slit into her eyelids in a downward fashion and then cut 2 flaps into her cheeks underneath, like 2 upside down V's. He's then cut around her cheek and chin and then cut across her face, taking the tip of her nose off and the top of her lip off, probably with the sole objective to peel Catherine Eddowes' face right off of her skull. Unless you want to believe my missus, who believes that by slitting into her eyelids, it takes away the actual last glimpse of the killer. That back in the 19th century, they did believe that the last thing you saw before you died was, imprinted on your eyelids. So my missus actually does believe that. Okay? You want to believe that? It's entirely up to you. I don't personally believe it. I believe that the killer was kind of rip her face off because she might have known who the killer was. That's my personal belief. But this doesn't stop the fact that how that really looked in real life is really barbaric. That's the actual crime scene photograph, guys. So obviously if you don't want to see it, you really shouldn't have come on a Jack the Ripper tour, to be perfectly honest. But you can see where the killer had cut across her face, taking the tip of her nose off and the top of her lip off, and cut around her cheek and chin. But you'll notice her ears are completely intact. The thing is, if you want to talk about barbarism, well, the thing is, guys, I think the City of London Police really cuts the mustard on that, because that's actually what they did. The City of London Police, to take that photograph, hung Catherine Eddowes standing up on a meat hook to take that picture, just so they could use it for the benefit of the inquest. I mean, you can actually see obviously where how sagged and indented her stomach was, and the lack of her intestines, and how jaggedly the killer ripped her open from her backside to her front side. I mean, like, they could have just gone with this. I mean, she's still wearing the blouse she was murdered in. But you see how deep the killer cut into her throat and at the bottom where her intestines used to be. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because that poor woman was murdered just around the corner from where we're standing in the dark in a little under 8 minutes. 8 bloody minutes! And let's not forget, it's the second woman he's murdered in 45 minutes under the nose of 2 different police forces in 2 different parts of London. No wonder the superstitious Victorians believed whoever committed these atrocities was some kind of devil from hell. And this devil from hell ain't done just yet, because a little over an hour later, back down the road in Whitechapel, the killer would end up leaving the one and only piece of evidence he'd ever leave. That's where I'm going to take you guys to now, so let's go. It's Thundercats.
Oh yeah. Thundercats.
Yeah, that friggin' rules. That's probably my favourite.
Yeah.
Even though like my favourite show of all time is The Nightmare.
Oh yeah. Oh gosh.
because that really gets you.
It's quite early CGI as well.
Yeah. That was my favourite show when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And then I got into Doctor Who. So it's like Doctor Who and Nightmare. But I always loved Thundercats. Right guys, so 2 women murdered in 45 minutes under the nose of 2 different police forces in 2 different parts of London. No wonder the superstitious Victorians believed whoever committed these atrocities was some kind of devil from hell. This devil from hell would end up leaving the one and only piece of evidence he'd ever leave inside of this very doorway right in front of us. As you can see from the roundels right above you and the roundels in the picture, it's the very same place. It was right there. 2:55 in the morning on the 30th of September 1888, a policeman by the name of Alfred Long came down here onto Goulston Street, shone his lantern inside that doorway, and found a piece of Catherine Eddowes' apron that the killer had discarded inside that doorway after using it to clean his hands and clean his knife of her blood and fecal matter. But some would say that's not the only thing that the killer left inside of the doorway, because written inside on the black brick wall in chalk were these words: "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Now this could be a cryptic message from our killer or a piece of anti-Semitic graffiti. We still don't know. If it's meant as an anti-Semitic message, then our killer doesn't know how to spell Jews correctly, because obviously you don't spell Jews J-U-W-E-S, now do ya? Also, not be blamed for nothing is a double negative, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Thing is, whatever this message may or may not mean, we have no photographic evidence of it inside this doorway, because before it can ever be photographed, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Charles Warren, turned up at the spot at 5 o'clock in the morning to view the message, and as soon as Sir Charles viewed the message, he had it immediately erased. Now this could seem a bit fishy. Forgive the pun, seeing as it's now a chip shop. But why would the Commissioner get out of bed, come all the way down to Whitechapel to view the message, only to have it immediately destroyed? Some people believe he did so to spite the City of London police. Others believe that J-U-W-E-S was actually pronounced Jeways and was linked to the secret society of the Freemasons, which I will get into a little later on. But the reason why Sir Charles had the message destroyed from the doorway is actually a lot simpler than you think. He had the message destroyed to protect the people who lived in this building, because 95% of the people who lived in this building back in 1888 were Jewish. It would only take one idiot to say that the Jews were responsible for the murders, and there would have been anarchy on the streets of Whitechapel. So Sir Charles has nipped it in the bud to protect the populace, and I commend him for that. I mean, don't get me wrong, if it was me, I would have just wiped the Jews bit away and then had it photographed and then had it erased. But I still think he did the right thing. Now at this point, it doesn't really matter to the tabloids, because now at this point you've had 2 women murdered in under an hour and 5 women murdered very publicly and very violently in a very socially volatile area. So now they can start calling the killer whatever the hell they want him to call, you know? So long gone is leather apron. Leather apron sounds a bit thick to them. So now they can start calling him like the bogeyman of the East End he is. He can now be Jack the Ripper. He's like any old bloke, but he's a ripper. So with that, the tabloids, well, it's all very pictorially based back in those days, and they don't have photographs in the papers at that time, so it's all illustrated. So they can start making it up as they go along. I hate to quote a certain person, but it's all fake news. So they can start showing what the victims look like before and after death. I mean, you remember the Elizabeth Stride picture I showed you guys earlier on, even though it's not accurate. Very similar. Then they start showing what the scenes of crime look like, even if it's not accurate. I mean, one of the most weirdest ones I saw was Elizabeth Stride's ghost visiting her sister as a ghost and telling her that she's all right. I mean, Elizabeth Stride didn't even have a sister, for God's sakes. Okay, she had 2 big brothers. And the thing is, while the newspapers are really advocating sort of whatever they want to create, it got people reading the newspapers. It was what made the Whitechapel murders so infamous. I mean, certainly they didn't help the fact that in October of 1888, they really lay it on pretty bloody thick. So, eventually, Jack the Ripper becomes a horror character. So, this is well before Dracula. I mean, Dracula wouldn't come about for 9 years. But he starts off his life as Mr. Skeleton Face. Oh, I know. What a strange little photo. But the thing is, that image was on the first book I ever read on the Whitechapel murders, which is The Complete History of Jack the Ripper by Philip Sugden in 1993 when it first came out. It was actually the first book I ever bought with my own money. The thing is, I love that image so much, I actually scrawled it on my folder where I used to keep all my memorabilia about the Whitechapel murders when I was just a little boy. And I love it so much, I have it tattooed on my arm. I'm not being funny. If you want to see it, I'll show you at the end of the tour. Okay? And then the killer became Mr. Jumpy Man. Before anybody says it, yes, it is the inspiration for a certain superhero. The thing is, back in 1938, so a good 50 years after the murders, Bob Kane, who was the creator of said Cape Crusader, he was on a holiday in Gotham in Nottinghamshire and heard the story of Spring-Heeled Jack, who used to leap over buildings and had razor-sharp claws and breathed fire. And he was inspired to create his famous character. It's also worth pointing out that said famous character would end up fighting Jack the Ripper in the 1988 comic Gotham by Gaslight. So yeah, eventually Batman fought Jack the Ripper. Bet you never knew that, did you? Check it out if you want, if you like comics. And then he became Mr. Ghostface. Thing is, guys, in the early days, yeah, I can mock it. Yeah, I could easily mock it. But back in those days, they really did believe that the devil was out in the streets. It wouldn't help the fact that back in 1888 in October, here in Whitechapel, it was the 1 month where there was actually fog on the streets. So the locals really did believe that the devil had come to this part of London. And the women were scared, absolutely petrified. So they fled the streets. They actually were allowed by a lot of their landlords to stay there rent-free because, you know, they were so terrified. The local men were going out at night trying to hunt the killer down. It didn't help the police either because they're trying to hunt this murderer down. They're just getting a load of false leads, a load of false letters, apparently from the murderer. The press aren't helping either because they're always bringing out something, you know, sort of like sensational about the killer, like you'd see in any tabloid to this very day and age. So throughout the whole of October in 1888, Jack the Ripper is the biggest thing in the world. I mean, it even stretches across the Atlantic as well. I mean, they even believe that there might be a Jack the Ripper in America as well. But throughout the whole of October in 1888, the killer didn't strike at all. Because what's the last thing you're going to do if everybody's out looking for you? You're not going to poke your head out the rabbit hole and get yourself caught. So the killer lays in wait. What I personally believe is that the killer actually hid in plain sight, like a lot of serial killers tend to do. You know, they speak to people in the pubs. They might have even been questioned by the police. They might have even spoken to the newspapers. They stay abreast of the whole situation so they know when they can strike again. And the thing is, all the while, they're calculating about when they can strike again. The thing is, when the killer would strike, the final time would be in November of 1888. And he would actually strike indoors, he'd strike against a younger woman, and it would be the most brutal of them all. And that happened just down the road. So let's go. Right guys, now remember at the start of the tour I did say that so much of the area has changed over the last 132 years. And the thing is, that's what you have to expect because London will always change. And sometimes even a whole area can change. I mean, Whitechapel in itself, you know, was bombed a great deal over the last 70 years by the Luftwaffe. Okay? So you have to expect that so much has changed. But given a point that also redevelopment has happened as well, then you're going to see that whole streets have disappeared. And case in point is right here. Because if you look at the square right here, that's what it used to look like back in 1888. That, my friends, was Dorset Street, otherwise known to the locals as the worst street in all of London. The place had 30 common lodging houses, 8 brothels, 4 pubs, and 2,000 of some of the worst people you could ever imagine. The sort of people made Billy the Kid look like Winnie the Pooh. A lot of time police officers wouldn't go down Dorset Street unless they were armed with shotguns. And if a rich man made from one end of the street to the other with his life, let alone his wallet, he was considered extremely lucky. But if I could draw your attention just quick, can you see where those black barriers are with the little blue lights on right there?
Yeah.
Can you all see them?
Yeah.
Well, that would have looked a little bit more like that back in 1888. That would have been a place called Miller's Court, a bunch of ramshackle tenements owned by an Irish pimp called John McCarthy. And if you went through the archway right there, you come up to number 13. And at number 13 Miller's Court is where our last lady used to live. And her name was Mary Jane Kelly. Now, Mary Jane Kelly is the youngest of our girls. She was 25 years of age back in 1888. Also the only one of our girls who was Irish or Welsh, depends on who you ask. And also the only one of our girls who had her own place to live. She had her own room at number 13. But by Friday the 9th of November 1888, she hadn't paid her rent since the murders of Stride and Eddowes. And she was in dire straits. So dead on midnight, the 9th of November 1888, she ventured out to the night to try and find herself some money. Or she has to beg, borrow, steal, or sell her body, whatever she has to do. Now, it took her a couple of hours, but by 2:30 in the morning on the 9th of November 1888, she ventured out to the night to try and find herself some dosh. Now, it took her a couple of hours, but by 2:30 in the morning on the 9th of November, she was seen outside the entrance of Miller's Court in the company of a guy who I will admit looks a tad like me. A guy wearing a thick white brim felt hat and a long coat. But that dude had a moustache, and he also wasn't wearing trainers, so it's not me. But there's another eyewitness description of a guy standing just behind them wearing a dark peak cap and a dusty old coat. But we do know that Mary is at least back in her room by about 3 o'clock in the morning, because her neighbour overheard her singing a song rather unfortunately called A Violet Plucked from Mother's Grave. But let's fast forward. It's 10:45 in the morning on the 9th of November 1888 when Mary Kelly's landlords got sick of her not paying her rent, so decided to send a debt collector around to collect what's due. And the debt collector is a big hulk of a fella by the name of Thomas Bowyer. Now Bowyer is built like a tank. No one messes with this geezer. So 10:45 in the morning, Bowyer comes round, he starts hammering on the door demanding what was due. But when he didn't get an answer, he went round the window at the side, which Mary had broken a week beforehand after an argument with her then boyfriend. But when he peered through the window, what he discovered would haunt him until his dying day. Because what the killer had left of Mary Jane Kelly just over there is what I'm about to show you guys right now. What I'm about to show you is the only crime scene photograph taken during the time of the Whitechapel murders. It's an image, when I first ever saw it when I was 7 years old, gave me nightmares. Obviously, I don't want to give you guys nightmares, but that's how they found Mary Kelly in her room. Mary Jane Kelly was torn to pieces. The killer had hacked her face beyond all recognition of her features. In fact, the only reason we know it was Mary inside that room is because her ex-boyfriend had to identify her by the colour of her hair and the colour of her eyes. Don't bother ask her throat was cut from ear to ear and back again, because the only thing keeping her head on for the rest of her body was her spinal column. Both of her breasts were completely hacked off, one placed under her head, the other between her ankles. The whole of her abdomen was hollowed out and scattered around her body. In fact, you can see her intestines on the bedside table right there. All of her genitals were completely removed and placed under her head with one of her breasts, and the flesh from her thighs was stripped right down to the bone, which you can see protruding right there, placed on the bedside table, and the skin peeled down like a pair of stockings. In fact, the only thing they didn't find of Mary Jane Kelly inside of that room was her heart, because wherever the killer had taken that, he's wrenched it out of her chest, stuck it in his pocket, and walked away with it. Wherever the hell he's walked away with it is anybody's guess, because after the death of that innocent 25-year-old woman, the murders cease. Runs the killer. It's not like he's wrapped. He goes poof into a cloud of smoke. This is a flesh and blood man with the flesh and blood of 6 women on his hands. And over the last 132 years, forgive the pun, we've all had a wild stab in the dark guessing who was Jack the Ripper. From butcher, baker to candlestick maker. From the highest in the land to the lowest in the gutter. I mean, there's so many theories out there, you can really get lost in it. I mean, I was talking to some people the other day about how many books you've got on the Whitechapel murders. Some would say like 300. I've got 250, for God's sakes. But there's nearly 1,000 books written on the Whitechapel murders over one series of murders. That's how famous it is. And the thing is, that also leads us up to how many suspects we got. In 1888, they had 5 people who could potentially be the killer. Now, you've got 200. 200 freaking suspects who could be the Whitechapel murderer. You know, and you know, there's always everybody's like chiming in about what they think. Who was it? Why did he do it? Why did he stop? Where did he go? Was it a man? Was it a woman? Was it more than one person? Was it a friggin' alien? Okay? Was there something to do with the occult? Was there something to do with a secret society? It boggles the mind. And the thing is, I spent nearly 30 years of my life studying this. Okay? And the thing is, in that near 30 years, well, unfortunately, the bedfellows of an unsolved murder and a conspiracy theory come together. And that's when we get to stuff like the Royal Conspiracy Theory. Royal Conspiracy Theory is probably the most famous of them all. That Queen Victoria's doctor, Sir William Gull, killed these women, working on behalf of the Freemasons to cover up the fact that Queen Victoria's grandson, Prince Albert Victor, had sired a child with a common woman and married her, and the local girls were blackmailing the Queen. So Sir William Gull was murdering these women in accordance to Masonic ritual. He's the one who wrote the Jeway message because it interlinked with the Masonic ritual of the Jeways, Jubela, Jubelo and Jubilum, who murdered the grand architect of the Temple of Solomon, even though that how they killed him is not exactly how these women were killed. And then after the murders, they had to nip it in the bud, and Sir William Gull sent away to an asylum, and that's why the murders cease. Then Abberline finds out about it. He's, wants to go public, but he's forced to keep his mouth shut. And the Masons and the royalty end up giving Abberline a shell of a lot of money, a nice house in Bournemouth, and Johnny Depp gets to play him in the movies. Yeah, you want to believe that crap? It's up to you. But at the end of the day, Sir William Gull wasn't a Freemason, and at the time of the murders was 70 years of age and paralysed down one side of his body after suffering from a stroke. Also, I really don't see the Queen or the Freemasons sending a 70-year-old man out into the most dangerous streets in all of London to kill 6 unknown women to cover up the fact that her grandson doesn't know how to keep it in his pants. So it's a bit of a friggin' stupid theory, but it's interesting, and that's why people enjoy it in a strange way. I won't lie, my favourite piece of fiction on the Whitechapel murders is about the Royal Conspiracy Theory, and that is the graphic novel of From Hell by Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell. I actually know Alan Moore on a speaking term. And I said that I love this. I think you did a fantastic job. He goes, well, at least you didn't like the movie. So that was his actual contribution to that. But at the end of the day, when you study this for such a long time, I mean, like, how I first ever got into this was with the Maybrick Diary. And it was all about this dude called James Maybrick. And with James Maybrick, he's murdering these women to on drug-fueled highs to get back at his wife who cheated on him. And then wrote all about it in his diary, and then hid it in his house in Liverpool. And then a year after the murders, he was poisoned by his wife. That was the story that went about in the early 90s when I first got into this. Then it found out that James Maybrick had actually just died of a drug overdose, and his wife didn't kill him. And also, the guy who came up with the diary faked the whole thing because he was trying to pay his child support. So it's one way to kick you in the shins when you're just a little kid, but it got me into this. So, I don't know, I can't really hate it or like it. And then you get people like Severin Kwasowski. Severin Kwasowski actually was in Whitechapel at the time of the murders, 5'7" in height, 23 years of age at the time of the murders, but he looked older. He also was medically skilled. He studied in the Polish army as a battlefield surgeon, so he knew how to cut quickly, he knew how to cut in the dark. He was a barber surgeon here in Whitechapel as well, so no one questioned him if he was covered in blood, and he legged it to America soon after the murders, where similar murders did take place. Thing is, this man actually was a convicted killer. Between 1897 and 1902, he killed 3 women, but he didn't mutilate them, he poisoned them. And that's usually where I lose people. Why would he go for mutilation and poisoning if he is the same guy? Thing is, if you're going to be willing enough to stand over a woman, strangle her to death, and then cut her throat, and then rip her guts out, you're more than willing to stand over a woman, tell her you love her, whilst gradually poisoning her and watching her vomit herself to death. It's also a little bit of a weird bit of irony. The guy who arrested him in 1902 was actually hunting the Whitechapel murderer in 1888, a guy called George Godley. He was Abberline's sergeant. And Abberline even thought this guy was the killer. When this guy went to the gallows in 1903, Abberline even turned up to see him hang, even though he was retired by that point, and said, "I see you got Jack the Ripper at last." Maybe it was a bit tongue-in-cheek, who's to say? But the thing is, guys, even if you look at a composite drawing made many years after the murders from eyewitness descriptions in 1888, it really does look a bit like Severin Kwasowski. But then again, it could look like Freddie friggin' Mercury, couldn't it? And the thing is, guys, he's my favourite suspect, I won't lie. I mean, like, I'm moving down to close to where this guy killed his first wife, soon. But it doesn't make him the killer. Because at the end of the day, if you guys wanted to find out who Jack the Ripper was, well, Jack the Ripper could be anybody. Everybody's got their own 2 cents on who they think the murderer is. But at the end of the day, you can pick any suspect, whether it be H.H. Holmes or Aaron Kosminski or Charles Lechmere or Jacob Levy or anything like that. There's so many suspects out there, but they're always just to be plucked on the face of Jack right there. And that's how he's always going to be, because Jack is what we remember. Thing is, as long as Jack is going to be the staple in things like the films and the books and the TV shows and the video games and action figures and lollipops and the flipping bomb bath I've seen over the years, then that's how we're always going to see him. The thing is, Jack the Ripper is just the name. Jack the Ripper didn't kill these women in 1888. The Whitechapel murderer did. Whoever that is still unknown to this very day and age. And he doesn't deserve to be remembered. What deserves to be remembered are those women, because they're the ones with names and faces and graves that you could go to this very day and age. Tomorrow, me and my wife are going to go to the graves of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes and put flowers down to pay remembrance to them, because we care, okay? Because they deserve to be remembered. And that's what should be taken from tonight's talk, okay? Those 6 innocent women who are only trying to find 4 pence for a bed or a beer. It's for warm and safe. Only try, feel maybe human for just a few moments. And unfortunately found themselves into the bloody pages of London's horrible history. So guys, thank you very much. Thank you. Well guys, thank you very much for coming on the tour today. It's been an absolute pleasure to take you guys around. Now, wherever you guys want to go from here, I can point you in the right direction. Whether you want to get something to eat, get something to drink, or just simply get the train home. I'll just let you guys know that we do accept tips here on the Jack the Ripper tour. We accept in two different ways. We accept in good cold hard cash, but also good reviews. So if you did enjoy the tour today, do tell your friends, even tell your enemies' friends. If you did enjoy the tour, my name is Jonny, and if you didn't like it, my name is Ricky. So I'll put my hat down if you want to leave any contributions.